All right, hi everyone. This video is to go over how to perform your data analysis on your own data for your research study. So I'm going to go through how this is performed and give you some tips and tricks kind of when doing this. It should be pretty straightforward, especially kind of if you followed along with some of the correlational SPSS activities already. But I did want to kind of talk a little bit about what this big data set looks like and how to go about organizing a little bit so that you can just look at specifically what you're interested in SPSS. So let's jump over first to Excel, where I'm going to give you the data file itself of all of the downloaded data from the survey, and then it'll be your job to kind of go through and select what you want to analyze and bring into SPSS. So I'll show you an example of that as well. All right, so when we look at our Excel file that we get from our downloaded data, which again, this is only partial because we're not fully done with our data collection just quite yet, but we're going to get more data by the end of this week. And you'll see when you do this, the full data set with all participants here. Now, this is what the data looks like when we download it from Qualtrics. And I want to go through this so you can understand how to use it and how to clean it and select and sort participants. It provides us with quite a few bits of information about the participant status. So, for example, the date that they took the survey, some other information such as how long it took them, the duration in seconds, progress, whether or not they finished it or how far through the survey they got, 100% being they finished it, and some other information that might be less useful to us. So what we really want to do is start over here, most likely on the age column, and look here at our first piece or our first question the participants responded with. Now, I always like to go through and remove participants for a couple different reasons. You may have different criteria, such as maybe you're only looking for participants that are within a certain age range, or you only want to look at male responses. Totally up to you how you want to handle this. But going through this, you can look and see what responses you got. Another helpful tip about Excel is you can also click on this drop down and see what answer choices were selected and filter by those as well. And so what this tells me right off the bat is that we didn't actually have anyone respond that they were under the age of 18, which is fantastic, which means we don't need to filter that out. I also like to look and see if the progress is anything less than 100, meaning that they didn't complete the survey, such as this participant right here. I would likely remove this participant as a response from my data as well. We have a few others appearing here. Now, when deleting things in Excel, a couple things to keep in mind. I do want to point out, if I just click my delete key, it's going to clear out that row, but it leaves now a blank row in my data, and that's not the best to work with, and it can get kind of messy as you keep doing this. So instead of using that, if I right click and select delete, what happens is it shifts that entire row up and removes that row and fills in that empty space. So that's a better way of going about doing this, is to find anything that you want to remove and then highlight the entire row, which you can do by clicking on the row number itself over here on the left, and then right clicking and deleting, and that removes the entire row and participant. Remembering again that each of these rows does represent one participant is also helpful at this point too. So our participants are each responding each row, and each column provides some different response or piece of information about that participant. So again, I'm just going to go through, and I may even start by holding down my control key, selecting multiple of these to do it at a time, just to speed this process up a little bit. All right, and there we go. And so what I'm left with now is only participants that have completed the survey and anybody that is above the age of 18, which I already checked and made sure I didn't have any responses less than 18. You may have other criteria for why you want to remove participants. That is entirely up to you. Next, you'll see as we scroll over other responses on our different scales and surveys. Things like gender, we can see the different responses here. Notice that they are numerical, so they are given to us as numbers. So to find out what these numbers represent, well, what's going to be helpful to do is to jump back to our survey itself and pull up our gender question. And we can see here from the way this question is presented, a value of 1 would represent male, a value of 2 female, 3 non-binary or third gender, 4 prefer to self-describe, and 5 prefer not to say. And you'll notice that this also has a fill in the blank section. And so in our data, there's an extra row over here for anybody that chose to self-describe and fill in that response, which it doesn't appear I have anyone in my data set at this time point. Same thing for race. We can notice that in the data set, the way these are described, a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 would be presented in this order. All right, and then going on from there, you'll notice that each of the rest of the questions or columns are kind of broken down into categories. So we have the big five, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to question 20. And so each of these questions here, we know in our scale, come from this big five set of questions. And so these are the 20 items of this scale. And so if you're interested in the big five or subsets of the big five, these might pertain to you. If we keep going, we see our self-esteem, we see our altruism, our intellect, and looking at our scale, we see self-esteem, altruism, and intelligence, followed by spirituality, religiosity, and then just who that person was, which I have hidden for the purpose of this video. And so if we scroll all the way over, we can see our last question of spirituality here in this column. Now, while this is nice and you can look at individual responses to specific questions on your scale from each participant, that's a lot to go through, and that's not really what we're curious about. So the way Qualtrics works, and what's really nice about Qualtrics, is it also gives us these scores for each of these overall questions. And so what we really want to do is look at the end of our survey all the way on the right, where we get our scores over here. And so what we get is a score, or a total sum score, for each participant on all of the questions from the big five that pertain to extroversion. Then again, all of the questions that pertain to agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, intellect. Then all of the questions summed together, their values for self-esteem, altruism, intelligence, and spirituality and religiosity. So what your job is to do, and a way I like to do this in Excel, is I would come over here and I would add in, say, a new sheet. So Excel is really nice because you can work with multiple pages or multiple sheets all in one file. And so what I might do first is just come grab anything that I'm curious about or interested in measuring. So maybe I want to grab age, gender, and race, and I can just copy these for now and paste them over in my new sheet, and then go to the next blank space up here. And then I'm just going to grab all of these final scores at the end of my sheet as well. So I'm going to copy those, and I'm just going to paste them over here, making sure that these line up so that you know that each participant's data stays with them. Next, what you can do is go through and remove anything that you don't need for your particular study. So what I mean by that is, well, maybe you're not interested in age or you're not interested in gender. Typically, it's good to report these things as well as race, but maybe we don't need our second gender column with responses because, well, nobody responded with those. I always say keep age, gender, and race because you're going to want to describe your sample at minimum in your participant section of your method. So when you go back for your final paper, you're going to want to update these values and find things like the average age. How many males, females, and other responses did you get for gender? What was the demographic breakdown of race that you got? And so after you've done that, you can go through and find which of these, specifically 3, that did you select to measure in your study. And so if you were curious about, say, extroversion, conscientiousness, and altruism, well, then you can go through and you can get rid of the ones that you don't need and leave you with just what you do want to measure. From this point, the only things we're going to move into SPSS are most likely the variables or the 3 variables that you wanted to measure. So you don't necessarily need to include age, gender, or race. These are more for describing your participants in your method than they are for analyzing in your results. Instead, what you want to do is most likely remove or potentially copy just one row of variable names with the rest of your data. So I like to go through and grab all of my data here, and also make sure that when you do this, you only select one of these variable rows. You don't need this SC026. You don't need that, just this row. And if we copy this, let's now switch over into SPSS. And what you should be able to do is if you click this first box with just a gray outline, don't double click so that you've got the white cursor, just a single click into the first box, you should be able to right click and choose paste with variable names. You're doing with variable names because we did select those in our highlight in the Excel file. So if I do this, what should happen is we then get our variable names and our variables at the top with all of our participant responses down here. And so from this point, it's really easy to finish up and to actually run your correlation. What you'll want to do is, just like we've been doing before, go to Analyze, Correlate, Bivariate Correlation. You'll put all of your variables in here. Again, you might want to go through and include means and standard deviations or things like that. And then you can hit OK and run your correlation. Again, this is going to give you your correlation table with each of your relationships shown when finding those intersection points. So you can go through and see what is the relationship between these different variables and then talk about those in your results section. When you're writing your results, each of these three relationships should be their own paragraph when looking at the example in the assignment sheet. So you'll do one paragraph talking about the relationship, in this case, between extroversion and conscientiousness, one between extroversion and altruism, and one between conscientiousness and altruism. As a reminder, remember correlation tables are always going to duplicate your findings. So even though it looks like there are 6 results here, there are really only 3. The other ones are identical to the other 3. So make sure that you describe all of those when writing up your results and that you follow along with these steps. Hopefully they were helpful to be able to create your correlations. You may also want to create graphs, in this case specifically scatter plots. Remember, you can go to the Graphs tab, scatter/dot, simple scatter, and then you can simply choose which of these you'd like to include in a graph at a given time. You can only do 2 at a time. So you can select, say, I want to graph, let's see, maybe the relationship between extroversion and altruism. I can include extroversion and altruism as my 2 variables in X and Y, and then hit OK to create my scatter plot. So it's as simple as that. Hopefully that was helpful to get you through your analysis section of your results. There is also the assignment sheet to go over writing up your results. Make sure you pay attention and follow along with that carefully. You will need to turn your correlation table from SPSS into a formatted correlation table. There are specific instructions on how to do that to make it APA format, but please, if you have questions, reach out and let me know. Overall, this should be pretty straightforward. And again, hopefully this video helps you in performing your data analysis.